If you want to find like the closest thing to absolute gender equality on Earth, you don't actually look to the richest nations in the West.
Right. You really don't.
No, and you don't look to these, hyper-industrialized powerhouses with massive sovereign wealth funds either.
Yeah, that's the standard assumption, but it's wrong.
Exactly. You look to a country where the average income is just a fraction of the United States, but where women outlive, out-educate, and out-legislate men at rates that completely defy global economics. You look to the Philippines.
It's a phenomenal contradiction. I mean, it forces anyone who studies global development to completely rethink how progress actually happens.
Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Monday, March 30, 2026, and today we are unpacking a massive, comprehensive data set of global human development indices spanning all the way from 1990 to 2023.
Yeah, we're looking at millions of data points today.
Millions, just trying to extract the hidden stories of how humanity is actually doing right now. But our primary mission for you listening today is to explore this astonishing, paradigm-shifting paradox hidden right there in the numbers for the Philippines.
Because the numbers really are jarring when you put them side by side.
They are, because if you look at their overall human development, which, measures health, education, and standard of living, they rank 122nd in the world.
Which places them firmly in the middle of the global pack. I mean, it is a developing, resource-constrained nation.
Right. And standard economic logic tells us that a middle-tier development ranking almost always comes with a whole host of traditional societal struggles, right? Especially significant gender inequality.
Oh, absolutely. The assumption has always been that you need, like, massive, overwhelming national wealth to build the systems required to level the playing field between men and women.
But the data reveals this huge, counterintuitive shocker. In the Gender Development Index, the Philippines isn't lagging. They're ranked in Group 1.
Which is the absolute highest tier of gender equality on the planet.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because how does a country with, limited economic resources manage to place its women in the global first tier?
Well, to understand what is essentially a gender miracle, we first have to understand the environment it grew out of.
Right, the context.
Exactly. We have to look at their turbulent but really resilient 30-year economic journey. Yeah. Because you just can't appreciate this specific anomaly without grasping the macro picture of the Philippines first.
So we start with the overall Human Development Index, right? The HDI. Let's translate that for the listener, because HDI gets thrown around a lot in the news.
Yeah, it does.
It's essentially a composite score, right? Like, it's not just how much money does the country make.
No, exactly. The HDI was created specifically to shift the focus of economics away from pure national income.
Okay.
It argues that progress shouldn't just be measured by the sheer volume of goods and services produced, It should be measured by the actual quality of life.
Makes sense.
So it combines three dimensions: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living.
So, like, life expectancy, education, and per capita income all rolled into one number.
Yes. And when you trace this metric for the Philippines from 1990, the story is one of a long, arduous, but steady climb.
Where did they start?
Back in 1990, their score was roughly 0.593. And over the next 3 decades, through financial crises, through natural disasters, which, they are highly susceptible to.
Oh, yeah, typhoons constantly.
Right. And through political shifts, they just ground that number upward. By their pre-pandemic peak in 2019, they reached about 0.708.
Now, moving from 0.59 to 0.70 might not sound like a huge deal if you're just looking at a spreadsheet, but what does that actual leap look like on the ground?
Well, what's fascinating here is the physical manifestation of those numbers. Leaving out of the 0.5 range and crossing into the 0.7 range is the difference between a society where basic day-to-day survival is the primary concern for a huge portion of the population and a society where a large middle class is taking root.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it means generationally, kids are reliably going to school instead of working. It means rudimentary clinics are being replaced by actual hospitals, which extends lifespans. It is a really transformative leap.
But then the data hits a brick wall because 2020 happened.
The COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
And the data from 2020 and 2021 reflects a catastrophic global shock, obviously. But it was particularly brutal for the Philippines. You have to consider their economic structure.
How so?
Well, they are heavily reliant on service industries, right? And on massive amounts of overseas remittances from workers abroad, plus intricate global supply chains. So when the world stopped, they were hit severely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Their HDI dropped significantly, falling back down to roughly 0.690 by 2021.
And which means years of hard-fought, grinding progress were erased almost overnight. I mean, the lockdowns, the strain on the medical system, the economic halt, it's a deep gouge in the data.
It really is.
But looking at the 2022 and 2023 numbers, the recovering curve is practically vertical. By 2023, they didn't just recover to their pre-pandemic levels, they surpassed them.
Yeah, hitting a historic high of 0.720, it is a textbook V-shaped recovery in terms of macroeconomic indicators.
Yeah.
It speaks to a real underlying structural robustness.
I have to push back on that a little bit, though.
Okay, sure.
Is a V-shaped recovery on paper a true reflection of reality, or does it, obscure the permanent damage? Because, yes, the national index bounced back, but what about the generation of kids who lost 2 years of schooling?
Right, the human cost.
Yeah, or the small businesses that permanently closed. Does the HDI capture that pain, or is it just smoothing it over?
That is a very valid critique of macro-level data, absolutely. And it raises an important question about how we interpret indices in general. The HDI measures averages and aggregates.
So it misses the margins.
Exactly. A V-shaped recovery at the national level means the systems, the health infrastructure, the school enrollment rates, the broader economic output rebooted remarkably fast. It does not mean every individual household recovered its lost wealth or that the educational deficit of those 2 years just vanished.
Right.
It just means the structural capacity to deliver human development was repaired quickly.
So the engine is running again, even if the passengers had a really rough ride.
Precisely. But we must contextualize that 0.720 score. It is a personal best for the nation, but it exists within a global framework.
Where does the rest of the world sit?
The world average HDI for 2023 sits at roughly 0.756. So the Philippines is sitting just below the global average. There's a specific gap there of 0.036.
And while a difference of 0.036 might sound like a rounding error to someone listening, in the math of human development, that tiny fraction represents a massive amount of reality on the ground, doesn't it?
Oh, massive.
They're about 95% of the way to the global average, but that final 5% is a grueling climb.
Because that fraction represents billions of dollars in raw economic output. It represents months or even years of average life expectancy. It represents the deeply entrenched infrastructural advantages that the wealthiest nations possess.
Right.
That gap is why they rank 122nd globally. It means they still have substantial ground to cover in sheer per capita income and absolute health outcomes compared to the top tier of countries.
So if we visualize this for you listening, it's not the traditional marathon runner analogy where everyone is on an equal track.
Oh, not at all.
It's more like a runner who has been training for 30 years, steadily improving. Mid-race, they suffer a terrible injury. That's the COVID drop. But instead of quitting, they tape up the injury, get back on the course, somehow cross the line at a personal best pace.
Yeah, that's the V-shaped recovery.
Exactly. But the reality check is that they are running on a dirt path while the elite athletes they're competing against are running on a freshly paved Olympic-grade track with a team of dietitians waiting at the finish line.
That's a great way to put it.
The elites are finishing ahead because of the track, not necessarily the effort.
That is exactly the distinction. The overall engine of the Philippines is resilient, but it is simply smaller and operating in a less forgiving environment than the global average.
Right.
And that brings us to the core tension of this entire deep dive. If their overall raw development is operating below the global average.
How on earth is their gender equality engine running like a hypercar?
Exactly.
Because if I walk into a boardroom or a university in Manila knowing they rank 122nd overall, my biased expectation is that I'm going to see a heavily male-dominated space.
Which would be typical for that HDI tier.
But the data says the exact opposite. So let's look at the numbers that define this gender miracle. We are moving from the HDI to the GDI, the Gender Development Index. Okay, I know what HDI is, but what does the G in GDI actually change about the math?
The GDI essentially takes that overall Human Development Index, health, education, income, and it calculates it entirely separately for men and entirely separately for women. Then it compares the two as a ratio. So it is a direct measurement of the gender gap in human development achievements.
And what's the baseline?
The world average GDI is roughly 0.955, meaning globally, women achieve about 95.5% of what men achieve in these core areas.
The Philippines scores an incredible 0.984. They are absolutely smashing past the global average.
They really are.
Women in the Philippines are achieving over 98% of what men are achieving in fundamental human development.
Which places them in Group 1 of the United Nations GDI classification. Group 1 countries are those where the absolute deviation from exact gender parity is less than 2.5%.
Wow.
Yeah, it is breathtakingly close to absolute equality in health, knowledge, and living standards.
And to add another layer to this, we have the Gender Inequality Index, or GII. Now, for the listener, unlike the other indices where higher is better, the GII works like a golf score. Lower is better.
Right, you want a low score here.
It measures the human development costs of gender inequality, specifically looking at reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market participation.
And here, the global average sits around 0.455. The Philippines scores a 0.351.
That's a huge difference.
It's massive. They are vastly outperforming the world, ranking 86th globally in minimizing inequality, which is significantly higher than their 122nd rank in overall development.
So what does this actually mean for economic theory? Because this seems to break all the rules.
Oh, it fundamentally breaks the established model. Development economists have long operated under the assumption that gender equality is, in a very cynical sense, a luxury good for nations.
A luxury good.
Yeah. The prevailing idea was that a country first needs to amass immense national wealth to raise its overall HDI into the very high categories, and only then does it have the excess capital to invest in the social infrastructure, the anti-discrimination enforcement, and the educational systems that close the gender gap.
Basically, get rich first, get fair later.
Precisely. But the Philippines proves that extreme gender fairness, at least in foundational developmental metrics, can be achieved under resource-constrained conditions. You do not have to be a wealthy nation to be a fair nation.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. We've established that the Philippines is beating the global average in equality by a massive margin without the economic safety nets of, like, Western Europe or Scandinavia.
Right.
But parity doesn't just happen by magic. Where exactly are women pulling ahead? Because if the overall HDI is 122nd, somebody has to be carrying the weight to get that gender parity score so high.
They do.
To see how they pulled this off, we have to look inside the classrooms and the halls of power. The data highlights something called a reverse gap.
The reverse gap is a crucial defining phenomenon in this data set. Historically and globally, we typically talk about the gender gap as women lagging behind men.
Why always?
But in the educational data for the Philippines, we see a distinct gender inversion. Women aren't just catching up to men, they are demonstrably leading them.
Let's translate this into real terms. The data looks at expected years of schooling. Essentially, this is a prediction. It looks at today's school enrollment and says, if a kid starts kindergarten right now, how long will they likely stay in the educational system?
Right, it's a forward-looking metric.
So for a Filipino boy, the expectation is about 12.1 years. But for a Filipino girl, it jumps to 13.07 years. That is a full year of additional expected education for girls.
And what is truly remarkable is how that compares to the rest of the world. The expected schooling for Filipino women at 13.07 years exactly matches the global average for women.
So while the men in the country are lagging behind the global baseline, the women have pulled themselves entirely up to the world standard.
Exactly. And this advantage isn't just a projection for young children. It is cemented in the reality of the adult population right now. If we look at the mean years of schooling, which measures the actual time spent in school by people 25 and older.
Okay, the adults.
Right. Filipino women average 10.1 years, outpacing Filipino men who average 9.78 years.
And it compounds as you go up the educational ladder, doesn't it? The classrooms get increasingly female-dominated as you move into higher education. Like over 63.6% of women in the Philippines have at least some secondary education, compared to exactly 60.0% of men.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this educational inversion is profound. Education is the primary mechanism for social mobility.
Absolutely.
When a society educates its women at a higher rate than its men, it is structurally programming itself for a massive shift in power dynamics in the coming generation. You are creating a cohort of women who possess the literacy, the analytical skills, and the academic credentials to navigate and control complex societal structures.
But wait, does a degree actually equal power? I mean, having a diploma is great, but does it get you a seat at the table where the laws are written?
That is the logical next question. And the data shows that this educational empowerment bleeds directly into political representation. Women in the Philippines hold 27.5% of parliamentary seats.
Which beats the global average of 26.5%.
Yes.
So you have a situation where Filipino women are not just highly educated. They are translating that education into a larger than average share of legislative power. They have the degrees and they have the political voice to advocate for their own needs.
And when a demographic group gains legislative power, They influence national budgets. They influence public health priorities. Which leads us to ask, if they have the education and the political influence, does that translate to their physical well-being?
Right.
Does it translate to the most fundamental metric of all, survival?
Well, the data says yes, emphatically. And to understand the quality of survival, we have to look at the literal life and death statistics.
This is a really important section.
We are going to spend some time here because this is perhaps the most crucial indicator of a society's soul. We are looking at the maternal mortality ratio, or MMR.
The MMR measures the number of women who die from pregnancy-related causes while pregnant, or within 42 days of giving birth, per 100,000 live births. It is widely considered by public health experts to be the single most revealing, sensitive indicator of a health system's functionality.
Let's really think about what goes into a maternal mortality rate. Surviving childbirth isn't just about biology, it is about logistics. How do you lower this number? You don't just hand out pamphlets.
No, not at all. It requires a massive, coordinated infrastructural effort. It means having a physical clinic reasonably close to where people live. It means having paved roads that don't wash out during monsoon season, so an ambulance or even just a car can get a woman in labor to that clinic.
It means having trained midwives, access to antibiotics, blood transfusions. It means a society has made the conscious budgetary decision to prioritize funding so that a pregnant woman doesn't die a preventable death.
Exactly.
And remember, the Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. Delivering standardized emergency health care across that kind of fragmented geography is a logistical nightmare.
Which makes their historical data staggering. In 1990, the maternal mortality ratio in the Philippines was a grim 193.6 deaths per 100,000 live births. It was a severe crisis.
Wow, almost 200.
Yes. But over the next 33 years, through dedicated shifts in policy, largely driven by that increasingly educated and politically active female demographic we just discussed, that number plummeted. By 2023, it dropped to 78.2.
Going from 193.6 down to 78.2 changes the entire fabric of a community. Think about the domino effect of a maternal death. It isn't just a tragedy for the woman, it fundamentally destabilizes the family.
It shatters it.
The surviving children are significantly more likely to drop out of school. They are more susceptible to poverty and malnutrition. By preventing those deaths, the Philippines isn't just saving lives in the moment, they are protecting the next generation's human development.
And to really grasp how impressive that 78.2 ratio is, we have to look at the rest of the world. The 2023 world average MMR is 216.1.
Let that sink in. The world average is 216.1. The Philippines is at 78.2. Their maternal mortality rate is barely a third of the global average.
It's incredible.
A Filipino woman living in a country that ranks 122nd in overall economic development is dramatically more likely to survive childbirth than the average woman on this planet.
And that targeted, holistic health advantage culminates in a significant longevity gap across the entire lifespan. In 2023, Filipino women have a life expectancy of 72.8 years.
And the men.
Filipino men, on the other hand, have a life expectancy of 66.9 years. Women are outlasting men by nearly 6 full years.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you listening right now? Let's summarize the picture we've painted so far. We are looking at a society where women are significantly more educated than men, pulling ahead by a full year of expected schooling.
Right.
They are claiming political power at rates higher than the global average. They have engineered public health outcomes that protect them during childbirth at rates that put the global average to shame, and they are living 6 years longer. It sounds like an absolute developmental utopia for women, right? A total victory.
It does sound like a flawless victory on paper.
But this is the deep dive. We don't just read the top-line summary. The data always has layers. And right after we paint this incredible picture of education and health, we have to drop the other shoe. Because there is a glaring, incredibly painful flaw in this data set.
Yes, there is. There is a massive contradiction sitting right at the heart of this success story. We've established that these women possess the ultimate human capital. They have the health, the longevity, and the higher education.
Yeah.
Logically, you would assume that this highly educated, healthy female population is absolutely dominating the national economy.
Yeah.
You would think they are the primary drivers of the formal workforce.
But they aren't. We need to talk about the glass ceiling. Or perhaps more accurately based on the data, the sticky floor.
Let's look at the numbers for the 2023 labor force participation rate. This metric measures the proportion of the working-age population ages 15 and older that is economically active in the formal job market.
Okay.
For men in the Philippines, the participation rate is 72.5%. For women, It is lagging far, far behind at 50.2%.
That is a massive 22.3 percentage point gap. Nearly half of the working-age female population is entirely outside the formal labor force.
And the consequence of that missing workforce participation is violently clear in the income data. When we look at the gross national income, or GNI, per capita, the disparity is stark.
And just to clarify for the listener, we are looking at GNI adjusted for purchasing power parity, or PPP. That means we aren't just looking at the raw exchange rate of the Philippine peso to the US dollar.
Right, because that doesn't tell the whole story.
PPP looks at how much a basket of groceries actually costs at a local market in Manila compared to New York. It measures actual living standards.
Precisely. It levels the economic playing field for comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2023, the estimated GNI per capita for men is $13,732.
And for women?
For women, it is roughly half of that, at just $7,744.
I have to act a bit frustrated here on behalf of the listener because looking at this part of the data is maddening. They have the degrees. They're literally sitting in the university classrooms in higher numbers than the men. They have the health. They're living longer. Why, if they have all the tools for economic success, is male income almost 1.8 times higher? Why are half of these incredibly capable women not in the labor force? This means economic empowerment is the absolute weakest link in this entire chain. What is actually happening?
This raises a profoundly important question about the limits of what metrics like the HDI and GDI can explicitly tell us. The data shows us what is happening. The gap exists, but we have to synthesize this contradiction to understand why.
Right.
Why is the labor force participation rate for women so low when their education is so high? The answer lies in systemic realities that aren't written in the mathematical formulas but are the undeniable cause of this gap. We are looking at the invisible, crushing weight of unpaid care work.
The second shift, or in this case, the only shift.
Exactly. In many societies, and strongly so in the Philippines, deep-rooted traditional domestic roles dictate that the primary responsibility for domestic labor falls overwhelmingly on women. This means raising children, caring for elderly relatives, managing the daily logistics of the household.
It's like spending millions of dollars to build a state-of-the-art solar farm. You invest in the best panels, that's the education. You ensure the hardware is perfectly maintained, that's the healthcare.
I like this analogy.
But then you completely forget to connect the solar farm to the national power grid. The energy is there, the potential is massive, but the formal economy can't use a single watt of it because all that energy is being consumed just keeping the local household running.
That is a perfect analogy. It is a leaky pipeline of human capital. The state and families invest heavily in educating these girls. The health system keeps them alive and well.
Yeah.
But at the exact moment they should be entering the economy to generate wealth, innovate, and drive the national HDI upward, they are absorbed into the unpaid, invisible domestic economy. Without access to affordable state-sponsored childcare or without a massive cultural shift towards shared domestic duties, hyper-educated women are structurally forced out of the formal labor market.
They become full-time caregivers. And the formal economy loses out on over 22% of its most educated workers. But what about the 50.2% of women who are in the workforce? Why is their income so much lower?
The income gap of $7,744 versus the men's $13,732 points to structural barriers within the workplace itself. It implies occupational segregation, women being culturally clustered in lower-paying industries, like caregiving or clerical work, while men dominate higher-paying industrial or technical sectors. It also implies a severe lack of access to upper management positions.
Motherhood penalty.
Yes. A woman's earnings typically drop or stagnate after having children because she is forced to take flexible, lower-paying roles to manage the household, while a man's earnings often rise as he is perceived as a provider. So the GDI Group 1 ranking is a miraculous achievement in foundational equality, health, and knowledge, but is not yet translated into economic equity.
It's a sobering reality check. But as we zoom out to look at the final sections of this massive data set, we start to see how the Philippines handles inequality and poverty as a whole. And when we look at the broader society, beyond just the gender binary, another very surprising strength emerges.
It really does.
Because while the economic gender gap is a shadow on the data, their overall societal distribution of resources is remarkably resilient. Let's explore the inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
The IHDI is a brilliant, necessary metric. It takes the standard HDI, which is just an average, and it discounts it based on how inequality is actually distributed across the population.
Right, because averages lie. If 10 people are in a room and one of them is a billionaire while the other 9 have $0, the average wealth in that room is $100 million. Everyone looks rich on paper.
Exactly. The IHDI penalizes countries for hoarding wealth and resources. It shows you the actual level of human development experienced by the average median person. It measures the loss of potential development due to inequality.
Okay, so what's the baseline here?
In 2023, the world average loss to inequality was a staggering 22.0%. The globe loses more than a fifth of its human development potential simply because resources are unevenly distributed.
But the Philippines. The Philippines loses only 17.1% of its HDI value when adjusted for inequality. They are significantly better than the global average at preventing resource hoarding.
It proves a crucial point about their developmental model. They don't have the massive, overwhelming national income of a fully developed nation.
Yeah.
Their raw income is moderate, but they are highly efficient at distributing what they do have.
Right.
The floor is relatively high.
Right.
And this efficiency is further proven when we look at a fascinating metric, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI.
I love the MPI because it moves beyond the old, lazy economic question of do you make $2 a day? The MPI asks questions about lived reality. Do you have a dirt floor? Do you have a functioning toilet? Do you have electricity? Is your child malnourished? It looks at poverty as a lived experience of multiple overlapping deprivations.
And despite a moderate national income, the data shows that only 3.9% of the population of the Philippines is in severe multidimensional poverty.
Only 3.9%. In a developing nation of over 100 million people, keeping the severe multi-layered poverty rate that low is a monumental achievement in social policy.
It is. Now, the data also breaks down what actually causes the poverty for that remaining 3.9%. And the deprivations are highly specific.
What are?
The largest contributor to this remaining poverty is child mortality, accounting for 24.6% of the index. This is followed by a lack of years of schooling at 17.6%, low school attendance at 15.1%, and notably, a reliance on dirty cooking fuel at 11.8%.
Cooking fuel. That is such a specific, visceral detail to find in a macroeconomic data set.
It is, but it is profoundly impactful.
If you are relying on solid fuels like wood, charcoal, or agricultural waste, and you are cooking indoors, you are inhaling thick smoke every single day. It destroys your lungs, it drastically reduces your lifespan, and frankly, it is usually women and young girls who are doing the cooking, so they bear the brunt of that respiratory disease.
Exactly.
Plus, the sheer time it takes to gather that wood creates immense time poverty.
It really does. But the fact that we are down to diagnosing the poverty of just 3.9% of the population by looking at specifics like cooking fuel shows how far the baseline standard of living has been raised.
And we have to add one final critical lens to this analysis: the environment. The planetary pressures adjusted HDI or PHDI.
This is the newest frontier in measuring progress. The PHDI takes a country's human development score and adjusts it downward based on their carbon dioxide emissions per capita and their material footprint. It answers a vital modern question: is your high standard of living destroying the planet?
And this is where the Philippines data does something incredible, because the Philippines has very low per capita carbon emissions, just 1.3 tons per person, which is a fraction of the global average of 4.5 tons.
A huge difference.
Yeah. Their global ranking completely transforms. In the raw, traditional HDI, they rank 122nd. But when you adjust for planetary pressures, they jump 42 spots. They land at 80th in the world in the PHDI.
It connects all three of these advanced indices together: the IHDI for inequality, the MPI for poverty, and the PHDI for the environment.
It's all connected.
The Philippines proves that you don't need a massive, environmentally destructive national income to distribute resources fairly. You can keep the vast majority of your people out of severe, multidimensional poverty, provide world-class foundational equality for women in health and education, and do it all without blowing past your planetary boundaries.
It requires us to completely rethink the standard economic analogies. Think of national development as baking a pie. The standard global model, pioneered by the West, says you need to bake a massive, gargantuan pie. And to bake it, you have to burn mountains of cheap, dirty coal to heat the oven.
Right, the old industrial model.
The logic is that even if a few billionaires eat 80% of that massive pie, the crumbs left over will be big enough to feed everyone else. But the data tells us the Philippines is operating a completely different bakery. They have a smaller pie than the world's richest countries, but they are doing a surprisingly excellent job of slicing it evenly, especially between men and women in health and education. They are making sure almost everyone gets a slice to stay out of severe poverty, and they are baking it in an oven that runs on a fraction of the carbon emissions.
That is a very apt summary of their complex developmental reality. They have structurally optimized for equity and sustainability over sheer brute force economic growth.
So bringing all these massive data sets together, spanning 30 years and millions of lives, what is the ultimate lesson you, the listener, should take away today? Let's start with the summary.
Okay.
The Philippines stands as an undeniable global role model in gender equality, achieving a Group 1 GDI ranking, completely erasing the educational gap to the point of a reverse gap, and plummeting maternal mortality rates by over 60% proves an essential truth. Social progress, human dignity, and gender equity do not have to wait for extreme economic wealth. You can prioritize human lives right now with the resources you have.
But we must reiterate the core pain point, because the mission of development is never entirely finished. The ultimate challenge remaining for the Philippines is economic empowerment.
The class ceiling?
Yes, the data screams this fact. The educational and health systems have created an immense gender dividend. A highly capable, highly educated female workforce is waiting in the wings.
Waiting to be plugged in.
Exactly. If the Philippines can dismantle the structural workplace barriers, address the unequal cultural burden of unpaid care work, and close that massive 22.3 percentage point labor participation gap, the economic implications are staggering. It would trigger a massive economic boom. Unlocking that trapped human capital is the precise mechanism that will propel their overall HDI from the 122nd rank up into the highest global tiers.
It's all right there in the numbers. It's just waiting to be activated. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder long after you stop listening today. For decades, the standard global playbook taught in universities and enacted by international banks has been get rich first, grow the GDP at all costs, and then use the leftover money to fix gender equality, to fix poverty, and to clean up the environment.
That's always been the script.
But the data from the Philippines asks us to fundamentally flip that script. What if equality isn't just the reward for economic development? What if equality is actually the most efficient engine to get you there? Think about how that applies not just to nations and global indices, but to the companies we work for, the institutions we build, and the communities we live in. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the numbers and keep looking for the hidden stories.